Okay, so it's time for us to go ahead and get back into our coverage over X-Men. Now, this might be a long video because we're going to go ahead and cover the last 4 issues we need to cover before we're able to move on to the next X team we have to talk about when it comes to our coverage over the X-Men leading into Operation Zero Tolerance. But this storyline does pick up where our last video had technically left off at when it comes to Nate Gray. The whole idea that out of nowhere, he had lost half of his abilities. So he's no longer able to use his telekinetic abilities anymore. He's still a telepath, but that's all he has left at the moment. And so for Nate Gray, it's him right now trying to look for answers. And so he's heading over to Muir Island to meet up with Moira McTaggart, kind of hoping that when it comes to Moira McTaggart, she might be able to really help him figure out what's going on with his abilities. Now, of course, without the idea of him being telekinesis anymore, he now has to travel by a boat without flying over to the island. So for Nate Gray, this is a tad bit different. It's an actual struggle, but it's also him wanting to sneak onto the island, sneak into the lab of Moira McTaggart, because the last time he came here, he fought against Excalibur, so it's him want to make sure to avoid the fighting. Now, for me personally, I kind of feel like you could have done that by just calling her. But this kind of leads into a flashback because we do pick up with Nate Gray at the Daily Bugle meeting up with Peter Parker. Now, this is a callback to the idea that in an earlier storyline, you have Peter and Nate being able to establish a friendship with one another. Now, with them doing that, it's also Nate Gray coming to Peter for answers. Now, for Nate Gray, he's there in his astral form. Nate Gray is really currently in Switzerland in this flashback because in our earlier video, he dealt with Madelyne prior across the world. And so it's him being able to send an astral form across the world to at least talk to Peter Parker to kind of get an idea of what he should do when it comes to his missing powers. Now, this flashback is really more of Peter Parker telling Nate Gray, like, you need to go somebody who's in the X family who can possibly help you. If you don't like the X-Men and you can't go to X-Force because they have heavy connections right now with the X-Men, and the same thing goes for X-Factor, then you need to go see Moira McTaggart. Now, technically, Excalibur does have heavy connections to the X-Men as well, but Moira McTaggart is the best person who can do some lab work on you to figure out what's going on with you. So, of course, this takes us back over to the present day. And we see that Nate has arrived to Muir Island. Now, with Nate Gray only being a telepath now, that means he has to do things differently than usual. And so you have Nate going out of his way to kind of use his powers to hide himself from the sight of Nightcrawler and the rest of Excalibur as well. So he could be right there next to them, but of course, they can't see him. So it's really more of Nate Gray just trying to work his way through Muir Island, work his way through Moira McTaggart's laboratory to hopefully find her so that she could actually help him figure out what's going on with him. The problem is that once he does reach her lab and finds Moira McTaggart, you have Moira McTaggart reveal that she knew that Nate Gray was on the island, but you also have Moira McTaggart go out of her way to put on a helmet to protect her mind from Nate Gray's powers. Now, we also have to remember that when it comes to Moira McTaggart, she's the only human right now we know of who currently has the legacy virus that's currently killing off mutants left and right. But she's the only human right now who has the legacy virus. Now, after a brief moment, we do see that Moira McTaggart try to call up Forge. And the reason why, because for Nate Gray in his old reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse, Forge was like a father figure to him. And so he was kind of hoping to see the Forge of this reality who could possibly help him figure out what's going on with his powers. But around his time in Marvel Comics, X-Factor and Forge were quote-unquote dead at the moment. Now, with that being said, for Moira McTaggart, she wants to step in where Forge can't. And so she wants to help out Nate. And let's not forget that in an earlier storyline, it was her who discovered that when it came to Nate Gray, his powers were killing him. Because for Mr. Sinister in the Age of Apocalypse reality, He wanted to create a weapon to use against Apocalypse, which was Nate Gray. But at the same time, he wanted to make sure that if Nate Gray got too powerful, he could possibly kill off Nate Gray. And so that failsafe was, if Nate Gray's powers just keep being used more and more often, then he will slowly kill off his body. He will slowly die. And so for Moira McTaggart, it's her right now wanting to run a few more tests to figure out what's happening to Nate Gray's body. Like, why in the world he's no longer able to access half of his abilities. Now, something else we do have to talk about, and that would be Dark Beast. Now, for Dark Beast, he had recently joined the Brotherhood that's being led by Havok. You see, around this time in Marvel Comics, for Havok, he had officially left X Factor once you had Dark Beast being able to take over the mind of Havok and how you use Havok to work alongside with Onslaught. But when it came to Havok, he kind of realized that he should no longer work with X Factor, but no longer work with the X-Men as well. Because yes, he still believes in Charles Xavier's dream, the whole idea of mutants and humans working together in harmony, living together in harmony. But for Havok, he wants to cross some lines to be able to reach that actual goal. And so he had created the Brotherhood. And so with that being said, he also recruited Dark Beast as well. Now for Dark Beast, this man got plans on plans. But for Dark Beast, he wants Nate Gray. But it's also him kind of using a sell pitch over to Havok saying, listen, if you want to change the world, you need to get your hands on Nate Gray. And so you have Dark Beast tell Havok where he can find Nate at. But as we do switch over to Nate Gray, we're seeing Nate Gray now being attacked by Moira McTaggart. Now, for Moira McTaggart, this is a test technically. The problem is that she does not tell Nate at all. And here's the reason why. Because she wants to see if Nate being attacked will help him re-unlock his abilities to use as a way to protect himself from her. And so right now, it's her kind of seeing, will Nate be able to use his telekinesis? The problem is that he can't. And for Moira McTaggart, she kind of realized what's currently going on. You see, she realized that it's Nate right now somehow suppressing his own abilities. And so for Nate Gray, this hits him pretty hard because it was already bad enough to hear the fact that like, oh, your powers are basically killing you off. But now you were talking about the idea that his own powers being locked away from him, powers that he used every day. Now, while you have Nate Gray kind of inform Moira McTaggart that he will most likely be leaving, that is when he's confronted by the Brotherhood. That will be Havok and Fatale. And of course, it's Havok saying like, hey, why not go ahead and join the Brotherhood? And so now we have to switch over to Department H. Now, Department H is a branch of the Canadian government that is sanctioned, supported, and monitored all the superhuman activity in Canada. Now, when it comes to Department H, around this time, Marvel Comics, what they were trying to do was reclaim their properties. So if you were a person, an item, or whatever, they would try to reclaim it. And so right now, they have reclaimed a mutant they're trying to transport on this train. Now, for Department H, they did bring a few guards with them, and they are called silencers. But yes, they're right now currently transporting the mutant, and that brings in the Brotherhood. Now, while you do have Nate Gray trying to help out Havok and also Fatale on this mission, is Nate Gray kind of realizing that he has to do things a tad bit different now, because usually he has all of his powers for him to use against his enemies out there in the field. But with the idea that half his powers are no longer around or just locked away at the moment, for Nate Gray, he has to try things a tad bit different. He has to be more aware of his surroundings because now he's no longer able to block the different attacks that are thrown at him. He has to evade them. He has to hide in the shadows. He has to use mind games to get around all his different enemies. But at the same time, he still is a useful person out there in the field. And so for Nate, we see him being useful for Havok and also Fatale. Now, for a brief moment, we do switch over to the home of Nate Gray and Trinity. They did share this home together for a very short period of time, but with the two characters technically going their separate ways, no one's there currently. But the thing is, something is happening in their home. Something to come down the road in a later story, possibly. Now, when it comes to Fatale, we do learn that she's still kind of working for Dark Beast. And technically, when it came to Dark Beast first arriving in this reality, because he's from the age of Apocalypse reality, she was always working with him, for him. And so even though technically both characters are now working with Havok as the idea of the Brotherhood, she still works for Dark Beast. And so Dark Beast was the one who told Havok to go find Nate Gray, but also make sure that Nate Gray does not find out about Dark Beast, because Nate and Dark Beast, they don't get along very well. Really more, Nate hates Dark Beast. And he knows if Nate finds out that Dark Beast is part of the Brotherhood, that could ruin their plans. So Fatale is teleporting back to where Dark Beast was at to tell him like, hey, listen, Nate has no idea about you just yet. Now, once you do have the heroes being able to get the train back over to their base, you didn't have Aurora be revealed to Nate Gray, finding out who she is. But you also have Nate realize when it came to Fatale, she was pretending to be one of the silencers, the guards for Department H on the train. But it's also Nate kind of wondering, like, if she was on the train the entire time, then why she didn't grab Aurora and teleport out of there, because she has the ability to teleport. Now for Havok, we can tell that he's kind of lying to Nate Gray by telling Nate like, oh, you know, we all have our limits, kind of hinting at the idea that she can't really teleport that far. But in reality, she can, but also because she has some side missions as well. But right after that, you then have Havok take Nate Gray over to this room. Now, this room is better known as the meditation room. And the machine inside there should help Nate Gray access the powers that were currently locked away from him. Because now it should work on his brainwave, dive deep into his mind to figure out where the blockage is actually at. And the thing is, it does work, but you don't really have Nate Gray question Havok where the device came from and how does it actually work. But either way, you do have Nate Gray being able to regain the powers that he had currently lost. Now you do have Nate go check in on Aurora, but when he does, he also sees Fatale in there as well. Now, here's the thing, because it's Nate Gray beginning to kind of think the Brotherhood is probably the best option for him to be at. Because for the X-Men, they have too many guidelines. They follow way too many rules. They're afraid to cross the line. But the idea of the Brotherhood being able to cross the lines to help reach the goal that Charles is supposedly trying to reach is a great idea for him, because now he no longer has to focus on what's the right thing to do when you're out there in the battlefield. Now, for me personally, the Brotherhood is kind of like X-Force, but by this point, X-Force is no longer what they used to be when they first appeared in 1990s for Marvel Comics. But you do have Nate Gray go check in on Aurora. She says thank you, and that kind of begins the process of these two characters building a bond with one another. But for Nate Gray, this is where things kind of go south for him, because you didn't have Nate Gray walk around the tunnels of the base of the Brotherhood, and then he finds this locked door. Now you do have Nate being able to unlock the locked door, but when he does, he sees all this gas inside of there, CS9. The thing is, this gas was on the train. So how in the world did it get there? Well, for Nate Gray, he realized the gas was teleported there by Fatale. That is why she wasn't really able to teleport Aurora off the train, because she had a different mission. And for Nate Gray, he has to confront Havok about this. And so you do have Nate Gray confront Havok about it. Except when Nate does confront Havok about it, it's Havok saying like, listen, the reason why Fatale was not really able to teleport Aurora off the train because her primary mission was not Aurora. Her primary mission was to get the gas off the train. Now for Nate, he does get very upset by this, but it's Havok telling him like, dude, we had a mission and mission is accomplished. But for Nate, he wants the honest truth to everything. And so he begins to look into the mind of Havok. Now for Havok, he's not scared to allow Nate Gray into his mind. In matter of fact, he brings down all defense walls in his mind to allow Nate to look into it. And so when Nate does, he realized who actually helped him regain his abilities. Of course, that being Dark Beast. Dark Beast was the one who had created a device that allowed Nate Gray to get his abilities back. And now Nate knows. And so as we dive into the next chapter, it's really more of us seeing Nate Gray really expressing how angry he is about the idea that he was used by Dark Beast in the Brotherhood, but also the fact that Dark Beast helped him, but also for Nate Gray, he remembers Dark Beast from his old reality. He remembers how evil Dark Beast was. He remembers that Dark Beast worked alongside with Mr. Sinister, who worked alongside with Apocalypse. He knows that Dark Beast had killed off so many people in his old reality. And so for Nate, he's trying to express to Havok and to Fatale that they have an evil person next to him, that Dark Beast is somebody they should not be working with at all. But for Havok, he has a counterattack to that actual argument. Because for Havok, what he says is this right here. Think about this, Nate. Out of everyone who's been around so far, who has truly helped you recently? And that would be Dark Beast. When it came to Moira McTaggart, she could not figure out how to actually help you regain your abilities. But you know who did? Dark Beast did. And so for Nate Gray, he kind of hates the idea that that's the truth right there that Havok has thrown right in his face. But for Nate Gray, he still wants to leave. So you have Nate Gray blast a hole in the building that leads over to Aurora to grab her and get her the heck out of there, because he believes if he does leave her behind, there's a possibility that Dark Beast might do something to her. Now, in an earlier storyline, we had learned that when it came to Aurora, she had a mental illness. Multiple personality disorder. And so when it came to Aurora around this time in Marvel Comics, I want to say that there were just two personalities. I could be wrong there, but I do know that when it came to Dark X-Men, they had discovered a range more of them in her mind. But for Nate Gray, it's him kind of telling us that there's only two right now in her mind. And the first one he meets as he walks into the room is this confident person who's just down with the idea of leaving with Nate Gray because he helped save her from Department H. But the other personality is completely different. This other one is scared of Nate Gray. She wants to find her missing brother. And so for Nate, he begins to realize that maybe, just maybe, that this is possibly the best scenario for her. Because if Dark Beast was able to help him regain his abilities, what if there's a possibility that they could help her? Now, while you have Nate Gray trying to leave, this kind of leads into Nate Gray remembering things from his reality when he first escaped from Mr. Sinister's lab, where as soon as he was able to make outside the lab, he was then confronted by Northstar and also Aurora, and also Havok as well. Now in that reality, they worked for Apocalypse. So in his mind right now, he has a bad image of those characters, even though in this reality, they're good guys, quote unquote good guys. But for Nate Gray, his mindset, the things he remembers about them was truly like just evil. They attacked him, but he was able to get away by using his abilities. But back in the present day, you didn't have Nate Gray be confronted by Havok of our reality. And so for Havok, it's really more him trying to convince Nate Gray not to leave by basically saying like, hey, listen, like I get the idea why you don't want to work with the X-Men because they're afraid of crossing lines. And matter of fact, when it comes to the X-Men, they're really big on policing the mutant race, because if we played as the nice mutants to the humans, then maybe down the road, mutants and humans might have the possibility of living together in harmony. But what if you have a group of people who are out there going after humans who might attack mutants down the road? Like, that is what the Brotherhood is doing right now. Now, for Nate Gray, he also knows that Havok is Scott Summers' brother. So technically, he's kind of like his uncle, but not really, because again, Nate Gray is from a different reality. But it's also Nate Gray pointing out that there's something motivating Havok to do all of this. Now, for Nate, he believes because knowing Havok's past, it's the whole idea that he has been controlled by so many other people over the years that this is him finally being able to break free. Now, also for Nate Gray, because he remembers Havok from his reality, it's him kind of saying like, this Havok is getting just as dark as the other Havok in the Age of Apocalypse reality. But you didn't have Nate Gray be confronted by Fatale. Now, Fatale's kind of able to play a little mind game on Nate Gray, but not in a way like she's a psychic, more like, okay, I can tell you're lonely and you need some company. So you have her being able to kiss Nate Gray and distract him a tad bit. But we now shift over to, well, Sebastian Shaw and also, well, Madelyne Pryor. And the reason why, because we do see that Madelyne Pryor has officially joined the Hellfire Club. Now, with her joining the Hellfire Club, it brings in a brand new alliance, Sebastian and also Madelyne. And so with this alliance, you do have Celine kind of being concerned about it. And so she tells Fitzroy and also she tells Tessa they must do something very soon to break up this brand new alliance in the inner circle when it comes to when it comes to Madelyne Pryor and also Sebastian. But you didn't have Nate Gray go confront Dark Beast. Now, when he does, at first, it does seem like it's Nate Gray wanting confirmation that Dark Beast could possibly help him. But in reality, it's Nate Gray asking Dark Beast, can he help Aurora? Because he wants to make sure that Dark Beast stays on the right side, like not try to use her in some kind of evil plan of his. And you do have Nate Gray punch Dark Beast to say like, if I find out you did anything to her, I'll come back here and there'll be more problems down the road between us. But to close on this chapter, you didn't have Nate Gray go over to where the Brotherhood was keeping the gas at. And for Nate Gray, he realized this gas is way too lethal to leave out there for anyone to use. So you have Nate Gray close the locked door behind him. And the thing is, he's now trapped inside because on the outside of that door is Havok and Fatale who are trying to stop him. Now, once you do have them being able to open up the actual door, they find Nate Gray, but he had released the gas. And let's not forget, this gas is lethal. So we're kind of left with the idea that Nate Gray is dead. And so as we do transition over to the next chapter, the final chapter of the storyline, we really do pick up with Nate Gray being pulled into the afterlife. It really does seem like his soul has left his body, and there's a huge possibility that he might actually die here. Now, for Havok and also Fatale, they're not really able to get over to Nate Gray because once the gas went off, that entire room got sealed shut. And matter of fact, the whole entire base getting shielded right now to kind of allow the gas to stay down there before it's able to actually escape. Now, while you do have the two characters trying to leave, you didn't have Dark Beast communicate to the heroes like, hey, listen, Nate Gray is dead. Like, right now, all the different readings I have on his body is telling me that he is no longer around. So you do have the two characters leave, but for Havok, he's now kind of wondering like, what is the actual next direction for the Brotherhood at this exact moment? Now, before we jump back over to Nate Gray, we jump over to the morgue. And the reason why, because in this morgue, you do have somebody who was a Jane Doe wake up and being able to walk out of the morgue. The problem is that you have other people who are dead in the morgue also being able to get back up and follow this person out of the morgue. And we're kind of left to wonder who it could possibly be. And so really right now is Nate Gray being visited by different spirits, starting off with technically his own spirit, like his own soul is there right now trying to have a conversation with him. And really it's more of his spirit saying like, look at you, here you are just laying here, somebody who realized that there was no place for you in the past, but you did not try to make a place for you in the future. But here you are right now, dying. Now, really, it's more his soul trying to get him to get back up again. Like, yes, you finally re-unlocked the powers that you had locked away. And maybe, just maybe, this could be your end because your body was technically dying because of your powers. But then he's visited by another spirit. This time it's Trinity. And with this spirit being here, it's really more kind of like her calling out to him in a way of saying like, don't go into the light. Like she's waiting for him to come back. She's hoping in the possibility that they could get back together again, but he has to come back to reality. Now, for Nate Gray, seeing his own spirit, but also seeing Trinity as a spirit, it kind of had Nate Gray believe that he was still alive. But then he sees Forge as a spirit, the Forge from his reality, who is kind of like a father figure to him. And seeing that spirit for Nate Gray is him now believing that, yeah, he is officially dead. And so Forge tells him like, yeah, you are dead. Matter of fact, your body is dead. The only thing working right now is that brain of yours. And that's really it. But the final spirit is Madelyne Pryor. And when it comes to Madelyne Pryor, it's really more of her saying like, look, I am living proof that you have the ability to make it back to this side, like to leave the other side, the afterlife, to come back into reality. Because remember, for Nate Gray, he brought her back to life. And so with that being said to him, then transition over to his soul again, because for the soul, it's trying to tell Nate Gray, like, you need me and I need you. Basically meaning your body needs a soul, which is me, and me as a soul needs a body. We need to come together as one if we want to make it out of this. And so just like that, you have Nate Gray pop right back up. He pops out of the ground. Now he did use a lot of energy. And the problem is that with him using all of that energy, he does get easily exhausted after being able to escape that area. And he does pass out in the middle of a park. But right after he does pass out, there are 3 ladies who are standing over him. And apparently they were looking for him and grab him. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. I'll see you next time, guys. Later.